Good morning. Thank you all for coming to Digital Hollywood. We used to call this the pre-day of Digital Hollywood. Now it's just one more day of Digital Hollywood. This panel, just for the record and for the webcast, is entitled Valuing and Financing Entertainment Content, Film, TV, Internet, Virtual Reality from VC, Private Equity to Corporate Investment. We should probably add cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and other sources, an ICO. But we're going to try to get through all of that in 1 hour. We will leave some time at the end for questions. It looks like, first of all, we appear to have a complete mystery panelist that I wasn't briefed on who wasn't here. So I don't know who Wang is, but if they show up, they're welcome. In any event, what I'd like to do, first of all, my name is Larry Gerbrandt. I'm principal of Media Valuation Partners and have been in the industry all the way from being a redhead to losing all the color in my hair. So that's a long time. No, seriously, my first job in media was in 1973. So you can do the math. Anyway, what I'd like to do is have each of our panelists introduce themselves and give us 30 seconds on what they do for context, and then we will start with the grilling.
Hi, my name is Megan Jones, and I'm a lawyer. I just changed firms, so I'm at a new firm now. I'm at Clark Trevithick, so you can't find me at my old law firm. And before I worked as a lawyer, and I'm a tax lawyer primarily, but other stuff too. I was an investment banker for a lot of years, including up in Silicon Valley, and I represented companies raising money, selling themselves. I also represented venture capitalists.
Seth?
Hi, I'm Seth Shapiro. I've been working in digital in Hollywood for 23 years. I think I did everything on the description that Victor wrote that Larry just read. I just wish I could remember what they were. So I've been in music. I went to Blizzard during the World of Warcraft build-out. Then I went to Disney and did a lot of games there. And then I went to DirecTV, where I worked on launching the original DVR services, the sports services, all of the Sunday ticket digital stuff. Then I went to work with venture and private equity and worked with most of the distributors and networks at one point or another, and did a lot of over-the-top work when that was really hot. And now I am actually working a lot in the blockchain and also in VR and AR. So that might be Victor's eerie list right there, I think.
Good morning. I'm Sky Moore. I'm a lawyer partner at Greenberg Glusker. I'm the author of a book called The Biz that's you can get on Amazon. There's the product placement part of the program. And I have a regular Forbes contributor. If you search my name, Skylar Moore, on Forbes, I have a series of blogs that I write for them, and I have a YouTube channel. And if you search my name under Sky Moore, you'll find my YouTube channel that is basically a course that I taught at UCLA for years, and it teaches the film business, film industry, finance, and legal side.
And he just did an excellent one for the VR, AR people among you in Forbes on the legal issues around VR like 2 days ago. Really, really good.
Ari?
All right, Digital Hollywood. Hey, my name is Ari Eisenstaedt. I want to thank you all so much. I'm really honored to be here. I'm from Silicon Valley, but have been an innovation activist with the United Nations for the last couple years, focusing on sustainable development in the SDGs and public-private partnerships. Today, I'll be representing Moeda, a crypto credit union where we're using blockchain technology to have impact investing for social entrepreneurs working for the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm also doing a lot in content production and virtual reality filming and live streaming right now in virtual reality that you can see up front. So happy to talk more about all of those.
Excellent. For our opening question, just to kind of get things rolling, I want to sort of get a sense of who's in the audience. How many are in production? Okay. How many are in finance? How many are doing just TV? How many are in the doing movies? That's very helpful. We won't talk about television then. Okay, fair enough. How many are doing TV in addition to movies? Okay, we will talk about television. In fact, my opening question was really going to be about the fact that we now have, I think at last count, there's, Seth, am I right, well over 400 episodic series in production right now?
Yeah, the number usually comes from Landgraf's team at FX, and I think the last one was near 5. It had been 435 in the previous year, and I think they're thinking it's going to break 500.
Okay, that's just a mind-boggling number in terms of the history of the business. I mean, I remember back when there were three channels, and you watched them on a little black and white TV set like that. But
and in the heyday of the big 3 networks, it was 60 to 80 shows. So
yeah.
That's a pretty extraordinary jump.
So this should be and we now have essentially two more studios in Amazon and Netflix. And that's not counting money that Apple and Hulu and Google are putting into the business. But we have at least 2 more billion-dollar spenders out there. So in theory, this should be the best of times. But somehow it doesn't seem to be working out that way, and in part because those companies are taking almost all the back end. So my first question for the panel is, how does an independent make money in today's environment? And I'm going to start with Sky just because he's in the thick of it, and then we'll get to the rest of the panel.
I'll give you my 2 cents on that answer and also where the world is going. I wrote a Forbes blog that was subtly titled "The Death of Film," and I believe it, which is the film industry as we know it is over. I've been doing this for 35 years. I'm used to doing independent films that head for theatrical. They go to Cannes, they go to the American film market, they get sold pre-sales. That whole market is dead. It's dying. Theaters are dying. Look at the stock price on the theaters have been sinking and went down 10%, I think, on Monday, just yesterday alone. In my view, the theatrical experience is on its death legs, and because of so many factors, people are shifting to Netflix. They're watching it at home. They're watching it on mobile. They're doing any number of things. It's gone to short form. It's gone to TV. Kids aren't going to theater. So I would tell anyone, get out of doing theatrical films. That's comment number 1. Comment number 2 is, it's going to be a digital world for the next 3 years that your buyers are all going to be, it's going to be Netflix, Amazon, Facebook, YouTube, Hulu. It's going to be a digital world for 3 years, and I would just absolutely target what they're looking for, whether it's short form, mobile, TV, hour, episodic. Even films. If you do films, I've had clients sell a number of films now to Netflix and Amazon, and that were aiming for theatrical and then just made a U-turn and then got picked up by Netflix. And yes, it's true, like Larry said, there's no back end on these deals, but hey, at least you get out with your skin intact and make a profit on the sale. They're paying serious numbers, big numbers for content. I mean, they just picked up The Irishman, which is a Martin Scorsese, Bob De Niro film. It's going to be it'll be their biggest budget. So they're swinging for the fences as well. And if you look, for example, like the Blade Runner and why it didn't work, this is totally predictable. It's not the films. It's the medium. Medium is the message, and theatrical just doesn't work. So I'd say aim for digital. And the second thing I'd say is produce anything get into production for VR, because at the end of 3 years, what's going to happen is that it's going to be a VR world, and the theaters that don't go bankrupt are going to shift to doing VR. And there's going to become location-based virtual reality experience. And there's some out there already that are ahead of the curve. IMAX has already opened a couple of venues. I just read that other theaters are exploring it. You've got The Void that is a VR location-based experience. Dreamscape is a new company that's being formed to do this. So VR, VR, VR. If you want to make money, produce content for VR, because there's going to be an enormous market for it. And then just as a footnote, because it just keeps coming up, this cryptocurrency, other than in unique situations, just stay away from it. It's a fraud. 90% of it is nonsense. There's just this mad, anything that people just hear this word, cryptocurrency, tokens, digital something, Bitcoin, blockchain, and there's this mad rush for it. It's going to collapse, and it's just not going to last. There's no way. I've just seen several proposals on this for financing film, and it's becoming kind of silly. So that's my 2 cents, Larry.
Well, this is going to be an interesting panel because there are people on either side of those sitting here. But I want to hear from Megan next.
So basically, not surprisingly, I agree with most of what Sky said. I'm going to look at it or talk about it from a different angle, though. I come from Silicon Valley originally. I mean, I literally grew up in and out of Silicon Valley with a dad in the high-tech industry. And I worked as an investment banker when the internet first happened. And I've seen kind of evolutions of funding and trends and companies and interests. When I was talking to a good friend of mine who's a venture capitalist who's funded content and is on the board of companies that are creating content, I was asking him in my relentless way about content and what kind of content Silicon Valley was looking at and how they were going to monetize it. And he got really annoyed with me. And he said, Megan, the content doesn't matter. He said, you have to look at the platform. It's not about how you monetize the content and what kind of content can you monetize. It's about what kind of content can support our platforms. And I thought, that's an interesting way of kind of flipping the question. And that's where I'm going to go to what Sky said, where he said it's 3 years of digital and then it's virtual reality. So we're looking at a different experience. When I first saw kind of content tank and stop being monetized effectively, it was through the music industry and how they didn't respond to all the sharing that was going on, or the free songs. They kind of just tried to fight it in court, and I remember a lawsuit where they took some single mom to court and she had to pay $200,000, which really didn't go over very well with their audience. But now you look at the music industry and they're actually really innovative. What they've managed to do is they've managed to take an industry where the songs themselves are now songs, no longer albums, so there's less monetization possible. They're still bootlegged and downloaded. I know my daughter does it. But they have these experiences now. How much do we pay for a concert or a festival? How much do we pay for, gosh, Rihanna just came out with a whole line of makeup. So, there they've taken a platform, to use a term, which is that Rihanna, for example, some person who's creating content, and they've turned it into a brand as opposed to just a song and content. So that's what I would say. If you want to make money, first of all, you have to look at what platforms you're effective on. If you can make your own content and put it on YouTube and find a way to monetize it, if Instagram's your thing, any way to build an audience, that's how you monetize.
Seth, I know that you recently authored a very well-received white paper on VR, and I also noticed before you came in that you're also speaking or attending a blockchain conference. I saw the little badge, so I have a feeling you're going to have an interesting point of view on financing in the future of the medium.
Sure. So to start with the exhibition, I mean, I agree. I've been saying the same thing for a long time because having sort of been in the front row for the evolution of DVR and OTT in the TV business, I think it was only a matter of time as consumer electronics devices got better and people consumed more on mobile and tablet and large screen TVs got better, that exhibition were going to be in trouble. There's probably an analogy there to what the music business did, which is they waited too long. But there's other than the scarcity of supply, a movie like Blade Runner that you just can't see anywhere else, really, why go to a theater if you've got a large screen TV? And so I agree, they're going to have to pivot to new experiences. We've been talking about that for probably 15 years. At first, it was going to be concerts. I think inevitably it has to be some sort of immersive experience, some sort of location-based VR. And in terms of VR generally, and yeah, that white paper, thanks, Larry. If you go to VRARproject.com, you can download it. It's the third year I've done it. I started with one of my students at USC. Now there are 12 of us on the last one, so this recent one is pretty good. And we're looking to build a community of interesting voices and to have sort of an editorial dialogue on this thing. It's totally free, so we're funding it. You can download that and read about what's happening in the different areas. But I'd kind of make an analogy to what happened in the first bubble, which is you had tons and tons of companies, and most of them failed, and then everybody said this whole thing is a fraud, and this is never going to happen. But out of that, you wound up with Google and Amazon and all the big winners, right? So you can make an argument, and I think it's pretty strong, in both VR, AR, and blockchain, that you almost have to have a sort of a euphoric frenzy to throw enough money and enough water and enough fertilizer on this stuff to figure out what's going to win. And I don't think there's ever been an instance, certainly in media, where you didn't have something like that, where you had a huge field of stuff, most of which turned out to be either fraudulent or crap, in order to create the big winners. So in VR and AR, you'll definitely see that. We can talk more about that if you want. But on the blockchain point, I do think it's going to be tremendously disruptive. One of the places it's going to be really disruptive is traditional venture. And so for those of you who follow it, there are a lot of problems with this ICO economy that we're living with. So briefly, an ICO, an initial coin offering, is a turn of phrase on an IPO, an initial public offering in stock, and it's based on the crowdfunder Kickstarter movement, where essentially people kick into a project believing in it. But the reason that it's gotten so crazy is because those coins, in this case, then trade on an exchange. And so for those of you that followed it, if you bought Ethereum, last July and you sold it in May, you made a tremendous amount of money. So there's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of craziness, but very briefly, there are things about the blockchain that are utterly transformative. And just to use the music example, because it just came up, imagine if every time a song was downloaded or played, instead of having to deal with the performing rights organizations with Harry Fox and ASCAP and the labels, and artists having to wait for an interminable series of audits and accounting transactions, what if the money that Larry paid the equivalent of $1 for something? What if there were smart contracts built in software that instantaneously distributed those funds to all the rights holders? So the rights holders immediately got their piece, the performers immediately got their piece, and the more downloads or streams of that piece happened, the more money would flow in, and it would disintermediate a lot of the really inefficient stuff in the middle. So smart contracts are disruptive. The whole notion of a distributed ledger, blockchain grew out of this notion. One of the things it grew out of is this notion that if you actually get involved in Bitcoin, for example, that is just a ledger in the same sense that any accounting ledger exists, where every transaction exists. The difference is that ledger is transparent to the whole world. So any of you can go home and download the entire history of the Bitcoin blockchain to your computer. So in the long run, fraud is dramatically reduced. In the short run, there are going to be a lot of people promoting all sorts of scammy things to try and co-opt the fact that there's all this money flowing into it. But I think the sort of troika, the way I think of it, like VR, AR on the one hand, the blockchain technology on the other, and then eventually AI. For our kids, that's the world they're going to grow up in, period.
Thanks. Ari, I'm curious, you've had a chance to hear 3 different points of view. I'm curious to hear yours.
Thank you. Well, I really agree with most of the things and the insights shared here today. The truth is that we're living in the most exciting time in human history. We're going through what the World Economic Forum calls the 4th Industrial Revolution. And what's going to happen is the UN estimates that about 1/3 of all jobs are going to disappear in the next few years. And I think that creates a really exciting opportunity for humanity to move from an economy of workers to creators. So I think that we're going to see a lot more content. We're going to see people really pursuing their creative passions, doing what they love. And I think that the question of how they make money is only a part of it. I think the other side of that equation is really how do they make impact? How do they do something that has a meaningful social and environmental impact as well as a financial sustainable model? And that's the case with this new generation of millennials, of Gen Y, Gen Z. The majority of them want to have an occupation that really aligns with their values. And the same goes with consumers. And I think that that content providers and platforms and distribution channels that acknowledge that and are able to account for that are going to be far more successful in this new economy. I think with that being said, it's really interesting to look at these new funding models. I think that blockchain technology, if I'm imagine, how many of you are familiar with blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies? So about half, it looks like. So blockchain technology is the underlying technology of cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and the like. And there are many scams out there as far as the currencies go. But as far as blockchain technology works, as far as this public ledger, that's just the future of software. That's going to be the future of data rights management, of accounting, of legal, of payment processing. So that's just the way that we're going to be able to distribute content, I believe, and I think the markets are showing right now. But then going a next step beyond that as far as a way to fund these different projects, that's something that we're looking at with Moeda, which means coin in Portuguese. We're now going to be partnering at the UN Climate Summit in Bonn, COP23 in November, and have an open competition for artists and content providers to create content and create their own new social enterprises to distribute this content for climate action and for sustainable development. So I'm really excited to see what this next generation of social entrepreneurs will create to really prove this new model.
I want you to respond, since you're heavily involved in blockchain, to Sky's comment about cryptocurrency.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we, for instance, issued a cryptocurrency, the MDA token. We raised about $20 million in 2 weeks. And this is now, these ICOs have overtaken venture capital funding. There's been over $1 billion year to date in funding for these new startups. So it completely changes the model of these limited partners and then general partners and a really consolidated effort. We also see the real lack of diversity in especially Silicon Valley and the venture capital world. The majority of venture capital funding is going to white men. Low single digits are going to women, low single digits are going to minorities. So there's a huge inequity there in the traditional financing world. And this really is now going to be the way that we can have really accountable crowdfunding. And I think that that's what cryptocurrencies are really showing to prove. And of course, there are many scams out there. There are many just bad companies that you shouldn't invest in overall. But I think the underlying blockchain technology is going to be really transformative.
In the last few months, we've seen two new entrants out of Silicon Valley in terms of content funding. Apple, which traditionally hasn't, they've always just distributed somebody else's content, and Facebook. And somewhere always in the background there seems to be Twitter. How do these new entrants change the production and financing marketplace for content? And I'll let anybody jump in on that.
I'll tell you a story. It depends what they do. We've been waiting for Apple for years. Like, where's Apple? Kind of like, where's Waldo? Like, they dominated the music side of the download. It's just astounding how they missed the boat on the audio visual. But the short answer is, it's going to be a lot more money. There's going to be tons. There's going to be it's going to be a digital gold rush for the next 3 years. They're all competing with each other, and the question is who's going to survive. But there's lots and lots of money, and Apple can throw lots and lots of money at it. So that's, we're waiting to see what they do. And then second is Facebook is the one company that could actually take on Netflix because they've got 3 billion users. They know what they like. They could target them exactly. They could they've got the infrastructure to do it. They don't think of themselves yet as really a media company, but they could. And so Facebook, and they've now done an initiative to do video, and they could absolutely jump in a huge way. So I would say Facebook is the one that could really take on Netflix if they get so inclined. But the short answer is right now we don't know really what either one is going to do.
I'll take a little bit. So this is just a personal opinion. I had a friend 20 years ago who was talking about studios and said this great thing off the cuff, one of those things that somebody says at dinner and forgets that they said, but you remember for the rest of your life. And what she said was, any facility that's a one facility owner, or any studio that's a one studio owner, has the strengths and weaknesses of that owner, which in my career has proven astonishingly prescient. And having worked with Amazon and Netflix, and Facebook and not Apple, you can see how much of the culture of the company drives this kind of thing. So Jeff Bezos has a very personal interest in content. You can see it. Roy Price and he have a very flat relationship. It's a small, very direct communication from the top to the content team. And what their mandate is, for those of you who saw the Game of Thrones quote leak, which obviously wasn't a leak from Bezos to his team a couple weeks ago, it's clear this guy is very hands-on. Apple's never had a television business. I don't know why it is, but I think it's culturally endemic. I think Jobs was very clearly and just factually looking to build a $30 bundle at Disney a long time ago when he was the largest shareholder at Disney, and he still couldn't make it happen. I think Apple's now hired these two guys out of Sony, is it? Yeah, out of Sony, and hopefully they'll do good things. I wouldn't put my money on it. I think getting into a content business for a business that has never been in content is a vexing thing. It's so much different. It's so much about trusting people's hunches and hiring showrunners and creative people and letting them do their thing. I think part of the reason that Netflix has been so astonishingly successful is that Reed Hastings and Ted Sarandos just formed a really strong relationship, and Ted had a deep business in video rental. I think you may have been with me years ago before he was quite as big as he was. I asked him, how did you wind up doing TV? And the fascinating thing was that many years ago, Netflix had the rights to Star's movie output. And do any of you happen to remember Vongo? So Vongo was the original Star's over-the-top offering, and they had a lot of TV. Long story short, John Malone was a primary owner. He pulled all the movies back from Netflix, and Netflix made a strategic decision. All right, let's try more television. That was the moment that kind of set them the path that they were on, because obviously series are franchised, there's more and more content, you get people in. That's when binge watching took off from there. They did the deals with AMC and so forth. So I think Netflix just culturally gets the content business. I think Amazon does. I don't think Apple does. Facebook, obviously the inclination so far has been to do live or near live or short form. I don't really think they come after Netflix because I don't think they do long form content. But the friends of mine that have done deals with them so far have found it to be very frustrating.
I kind of cringed near the end of that. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Okay, you have never done content before. How many here, the first time you made your content, had you ever done content before? Sorry, but there's dumb money and there's smart money. So dumb money is basically someone who wants to get into a business and doesn't have a clue what they're doing. And investment bankers love dumb money. There's also smart money, and that's the kind of money that someone has a knowledge base or connections or a platform or something that can help you. So, is a lot of the Silicon Valley money dumb money or smart money? I'm betting for people who've been able to build brand new businesses out of nothing and kind of envision a world that we didn't see before. These companies have so much money and they can afford to lose it. They've also hired a lot of very talented people, whether it's young people who don't have kind of legacy overhang of what the business used to be, or people who do have legacy overhang and have intelligence and creativity and are helping them build these businesses. So are they going to fail more than they succeed? Probably, yes, but I would say the big studios right now are failing more than they succeed as well. I saw the new Blade Runner movie over the weekend. My son dragged me to that. It was 2 hours and 45 minutes. I almost died. I mean, I'm just not used to movies that length anymore, and it didn't do as well as expected. $150 million, I think it cost, and it made $31 million over the weekend, expected to do more. So, yes, is it tough in this new world, changing world? Absolutely. But I think that having these great platforms making content with the kind of budgets that they have and their willingness to kind of throw money at a problem until it works is a good thing.
Ari, I'll let you get in on that one.
Yeah, I think to just briefly say that how and reflect on how disruptive these companies are and have been, they're still relatively new. And in the last .com bubble, there were about a couple 100 million people online. Now we have we're approaching half of the world is online, over 3 billion people. And then in the next couple years, we're going to have 90% of the people online. So the markets are getting so huge, the technologies are moving so quickly that I would not be surprised if we saw, if on this panel next year, there will be completely new names that will start to replace those tech giants. With that being said, though, their influence is really ubiquitous, and it's exciting and really interesting to see now how these platforms are becoming this two-way street where the audience can really engage and form relationships with these artists, and I'm really interested to see what will happen from there.
How important is big data to the future of making better content? Would big data have prevented $150 million misfire on Blade Runner, which I went to see this weekend too? There were 3 other people in the theater with me. It was the 9:15 Sunday night showing, but it was a 3D, and it was almost like having my own screening room, which was a little scary from a theater owner's standpoint. But would that have would big data, which clearly Netflix has access to, Facebook has access to some extent Apple does as well, would that have prevented, would it have prevented that, whatever mistakes they made in making that film, but does it really make a difference in terms of what content is made? Go ahead.
Let me address that. Big data is critical for distribution. And there's a company called A24 that has really at the forefront of using big data to target exactly how the social media works, what advertising they do. They pull it if it's not working. They track the data. And whereas the studios, my client Finance, unfortunately, Silence, which was silenced in the theaters. And Paramount did a blunderbuss, old school, media all over the place instead of targeting, for example, the Christian audience, which really should have been targeted. And on the other hand, you watch A24, which doesn't do the billboards and the bus signs and everything, and does very targeted social media. So big data is absolutely critical for distribution, and all the digital companies can do this in an incredible way. Big data, I don't think, can solve the creative issue that, like, how long should Blade Runner run? That's just a matter of, like, duh. You don't make it 2.5 hours. But what's coming is, and which Seth alluded to, which is AI. And AI it is already making creative decisions and ultimately will make a film and will make it better than we do, by the way, because it's going to take time, but AI is the answer to that question.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think big data is this big buzzword that's been around for a long time, and computers used to be the jobs of people. They would be called computers. But I think what we're seeing now in terms of machine learning and artificial intelligence and predictive analytics, it's becoming really interesting to see in what the interaction with the audience and the market can really be. And I think that we'll start to be able to have what I would like to call a big democracy and have people vote in a way, really engage and say, I want Blade Runner to be less than 2 hours. I want this type of storyline. I want to see these types of thought leaders coming out there. So I think that there'll be a lot more information and aggregating that data on what the market really wants. And then I think going a step beyond that, as far as these AI systems, there are now starting to be artificial intelligence programs that are writing content themselves, from music to screenplays. So that's going to be fascinating to see if we can have computers doing the content creation in itself.
I don't know. They're going to have to get a lot smarter than they currently are. This last weekend, I was charging my GPS unit in my office, and my grandson was in there watching a movie on an iPad. And I was just outside, and suddenly I hear this violent argument break out between him and the GPS unit. Somehow it triggered. And she said, I don't understand what you just said, or something to that effect. And he responded, and the GPS unit responded, and he started yelling at her, "You're annoying me. I don't understand what you're saying. Shut up. I don't understand what you have to." It was actually quite humorous. Anyway, I have a feeling they will get smarter. And eventually, I can imagine two AI units holding a conversation at the speed of light. So, and then
Well, just real quick.
And then the Transformers come, and it's all anyway.
I actually do some work with IBM, who have Watson, and also their video division and Watson are doing stuff together. It's already happening. I mean, it's already happening. It's just really disturbing. So the folks with really good AI, I think understandably, are reluctant to share the experiences that they're having when the machines start talking back, which they're already starting to do, because I think culturally we're all leery about it. And so there could be a real groundswell against socializing some of what AI is already starting to suggest. That's been my personal experience.
Anybody else want to?
Just to add, I think also, again, going back to the impact side and the data around being able to show, how these artists are having an effect on the local environment, the local economy, the global ecosystem around what kind of impact these ideas really make. I think that, again, people are going to want to support these causes that are really aligned with their values, and I hope that these new data systems can really help maximize that potential.
Last question for the panel before we go to the audience. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about the international market. It used to be that you made certain number of, you financed it with international pre-sales, at least movies and to some extent television as well. Now with the OTT services, they're typically buying global rights up front. Is there an international market, or are they just a source of production financing?
This was my life.
Yeah, I know.
This is what I used to do for a living, right? Now I do Windows. The pre-sale market is dying fast. The old model of, and what's happened is, as you can imagine, as the digital OTT goes worldwide, you impact immediately the theatrical experience, pay TV, VOD, DVD, and all that's left is free TV. And so the foreign distributors that used to buy all of Germany, for example, I represent a number of foreign distributors that would buy all of Japan, all of China, all of Germany. They can't, either they just don't buy because Netflix is picking up one or the other of the media, or the numbers just go way down, or all that's left is the direct. When you go to the market, all that's left is the direct. And so it's completely been hammered. I will tell you, in the last few years, the pre-sale market is just hammered. And I've had experiences where I had one recently, my life is I do pre-sales, and it's all the craziness of notices of assignment and distribution agreements and banking and bonds and everything. And the other was just another film exactly the same budget range going to Netflix, and it was just one deal. And so the efficiencies is just going to the OTT market, and it's absolutely swamped in the presale market.
And I come from finance, so I look at money a very specific way. And I would almost say to most people, it just doesn't matter. When we were trying to get any deal done, we obviously would have to look at the market. And I started in technology, which was very cyclical, where sometimes you just couldn't get money. But, there's always someone who's got money somewhere who can help you out. And so, here we're talking about different trends. We're talking about, okay, Amazon's got tons of money, and Netflix has tons of money, and YouTube has tons of money, and maybe not so much money is coming from China right now. So as a content creator or someone who's trying to sell something, a company or a product, or content, or yourself, whatever you're trying to sell, you kind of have to just coldly assess the market at any given time and say, okay, that flow of funds, that model isn't working right now. Will it work later? It doesn't really matter. I'm trying to make something now. And so where are the opportunities? And that's going back to the platform again. This is the world as it is right now, and if you want to get something made in the next 12 to 18 months, you need to look at that reality. And if you want to really be smart, then you start thinking, okay, what about 3 years from now? What about the long term? What about this content? I mean, sometimes I was valuing something for a client of ours. It's a dead celebrity, and these are movies going back 50 years. They still have value. So, there's value today, there's value yesterday, there's value tomorrow. And if you're looking at the world today, you really only care about how you're going to get from your point right now through the end of your product, sell it such that you can make enough money to then look at the market again and make the next product or content or whatever.
Can I make a happy observation?
Sure.
So this is one for creatives, for writers and producers. One show that I thought was really remarkable, not that it's necessarily an outstanding show, but as a format, was Narcos. Because Narcos, if you've watched it, if you watch it not knowing, you don't really know whether that was produced by a Latin American production company or an English language production company. It's basically 50-50. It's playing on a platform that has penetration in each. The revenue model already exists. It's something that prior to Netflix, I don't think ever could have happened to have a format like that. And it reminded me of, I was doing some work in Rio in 2012, and there had been legislation when Brazil was still sort of on the uptrend relative to how much domestic content Brazil would have to take, and it was sort of a pushback against the big studios that were present in Brazil. And one thing that I found was there was this really interesting cross-chatter between Brazilian telenovelas and Korean soap operas, because they sort of share a lot of the same elements, the sort of operatic stuff. And so I think one of the nice things about the global platforms, and it's obviously not great that foreign presale gets impacted, but one nice thing is, in an increasingly global world, if you have the ability to create a market. I mean, for example, the blockchain market, for those of us, if you work in blockchain and you're in America, you are at a disadvantage, my friend, because this country is just behind. It's in other territories and in other conferences and other areas that are leading the way in that. And so I think as a content producer, I would be really fascinated looking at, like the big one we used to look at is like second generation Hispanic culture in America that speaks both Spanish and English, still grossly underserved. So I think to the extent that you can find new global audiences that you can reach wherever they are, which you couldn't really do before from a Netflix, from one platform because OTT didn't exist, I think that's still going to be an amazing opportunity for the people who can harness it.
But let me add another happy note to that, because exactly apart from theatrical experience, Netflix has said, in particular with Narcos, that they can afford $20 million per hour for television content if it goes worldwide. All right, so there's the future. Yes, international, obviously not theatrical, but $20 million an hour. Who can compete with that? So there's money being absolute enormous amounts of money for content creation on a digital platform.
How much of that goes to the producer?
A lot, but I mean, look, you're not going to get it back end,
right.
But I sell a lot to Netflix, so I know their model. The percentage used to be a higher percentage, is now going down. but you make a profit. And you make a profit on every episode, and it ain't bad, you know? And that's a happy day compared to, frankly, most films lose money. So I keep hearing, oh, you lose the back end. It's like, huh? The only back end you lose is the losses that you use, you know, is the average is what you get on a normal film. So here you have a built-in profit, happy day.
Ari?
Just to briefly say, I think the entertainment industry is going to move more from geographic markets and regions to individual interests and genres. And so these digital platforms will really allow for this tailored, personalized, precision marketing. And I think that the market of pre-sales will shift from these larger distribution deals to individual supporters, like we've seen in the crowdfunding world, where people, for instance, with our platform, will be able to invest in a project or buy a ticket up front and then be able to engage and see each step of the production process and then beyond. So I think that that's going to be really fascinating.
And by the way, the big guys understand this because I completely agree. One tell on that would be something like Crunchyroll, the Churn and Otter deal. So Peter Churn, former head of Fox, has a $500 million war chest from AT&T, and the initial foray was into doing things just like that, looking for niches like anime or other things that have pockets of audience all around the world that weren't necessarily, it's more of a scatter market, but they're passionate, they'll pay. So I think you will see an opportunity in niches like that, both on a small scale independently, but also coming from the big guys.
We have a question all the way in the back. Could you stand up, please?
Selling out to Netflix or Amazon? Sure, I'd love to. But they have an offer. And they don't want America. And there are a lot of other businesses.
Thank you. Go ahead, right there.
Okay, so my question is, it's also a comment, but I would like to hear your thought about it. I think you were mentioning the bubbles that exploded, and like I think in every one of those bubbles, what happened is that like we empty one market, trying to get as much revenue from, and then we empty that, and then we forget that people still need to pay for it. They need to have the money to pay for what we're going to sell them. And I think like, you know, when talking about computers going to make the content, then it's like computers don't need to be entertained. So like in a way what we need to like build is like, you know, the human experience again. If all the elements are taken away, like what the human experience really means, like what is the value of the human experience, or like how people can create like content that like elevate the human experience so people still want to have it. And I think when you talk about the music market, it's all about, you know, then I should understand like how to deliberately target the human experience of watching and listening. So how do you think you can translate that to the content?
Any response? Okay.
Yeah, just to quickly say, I completely agree, and I think that that the arts will be the last thing that AI will take over. But I think that this automation can really remove the obstacles and the pieces of building a business or a technology that humans don't want to do, and will allow people to pursue their creative passions. And then on the receiving end, I think that we will continue to develop our interpersonal reactions in real life. And I am excited about the merger of the virtual and the physical world. And I think that we're going to see an evolution of the theater environment, and I think it will be great.
I'll just add one quick thing. Bubbles can actually be a good thing in one way, in that you see a lot of things that don't work, and also a lot of things that don't work the first time work the second time. I remember all the online grocery stores that went out of business during the internet bubble, and now I order my groceries from Amazon. So, bubbles can be good too. Just look at the ideas and sometimes rehash them.
Here, and then we'll go down here.
My question is for Megan and Skylar, because the title of this is Valuing and Financing. And since you mentioned thinking 3 years down the road, how would you value a new distribution platform that hasn't gone public, that hasn't gone live yet with content, but has that potential to be disruptive?
Oh, I love that question so much. One of the worst assignments. The assignment is, how do you value content on a new platform that doesn't really exist or is just in the process of existing? One of the hardest assignments I did when I first started as an investment banker was valuing a company in an industry that didn't exist yet and they didn't have a product yet. And it taught me how to do that. So what you're going to do is you're going to analogize to other platforms. So you look at other industries that are the same. And it's not like you necessarily look at the movie industry per se. You look at other industries that have had a similar kind of growth rate, and you look at companies in that industry. So to kind of, maybe it's color television as opposed to the movie industry today. That was a new platform. And you look at how it grew. And then you look at your market, you size your market, you make an estimate on kind of what type of penetration you can get of that market, and then you start getting a picture of what kind of A, growth rate you can see, B, what you can charge, what kind of revenues you can come up with, and then you kind of build a model. And the model is very touchy-feely, right? You're making a lot of assumptions, but when you're valuing it, you will be wrong. You just want to have the strongest assumptions that you can support, that you can really believe in. And then you just hope that you're somewhat not as wrong as you thought. Does that make sense, or was that not specific enough?
Actually, I do this. My company is Media Evaluation Partners, so I do this for a living. You're absolutely right. The key is to start out with the relevant universe and figure out what percentage of your target universe you can get, and look at the uptake patterns of other companies, and then undershoot your projections. In other words, don't assume that you're going to be as good as the top end in the business, because they're not going to. No investor will believe you. You're going to have to be very conservative and use a very high discount rate.
I do 3. I do best case scenario, worst case scenario, and kind of the middle of the road, what I think is really going to happen.
And then just to add, this is something that we're working on developing in an automated system. So to plug in all those revenue projections and then look at a stochastic model. So to be able to see what the rest of the market is returning, and then be able to see where a project would fit in, what the discount rate is, what the valuation would be. But then we're also looking at the other pillars of sustainable development. So what would the impact be on the planet, on people, partnerships, peace, as well as profit. So we are trying to create an automated AI credit rating system on valuations for these social enterprises.
Almost any business plan or any company can be broken down into value per customer, and maybe even more important, the cost of acquiring a customer. Those are the cost to acquire the customer is something that most companies or startups don't really fully understand. We have a question down here, and then we'll go there if we have time. Okay, go ahead.
It's a little bit of the parallel question to the one you just answered, which is in terms of evaluation of intellectual property and content. Megan, you said you had just worked on that with a dead celebrity's estate. But let's say you were George R.R. Martin before Game of Thrones got made, and you had a library of content as a writer. How would you go about valuation on that?
Well, that's a lot of work for someone who has that amount of content. But for estates, the general rule is like 3 times your last year's revenue. That's like breaking it into the simplest. But if you're going to look at something like that, First of all, if we look, let's say, at the Michael Jackson estate, where they grossly misvalued by hundreds of millions of dollars, according to the IRS, they had a very difficult question of what was the asset worth at time of death, not after he died and all of a sudden everyone wanted his content. So if you take someone who's got a really big library, you would have to do it asset by asset. And so what you'd have to do is you'd look at kind of the history of the revenues per asset, and then you would project it out. So let's just take one example. Let's take one of his books, for example. Okay, you could say the sales last year were, I can't even estimate, but let's say they were 1 million books last year, just to have an even number. Okay, well, the year before that, it was 500,000. The year before that, it was maybe 10,000.
Excuse me, I was talking about more in terms of exploiting for film and television.
Okay.
Film and television rights on that kind of IP and games and things.
So again, it's the same process. You're going to look at the historical revenues, and then you're going to get a trend from that. You can see whether there's like an increase in the interest in that asset, if there's a decrease, if it's flat, and then you can kind of estimate out going forward whether it's going to continue to be popular or not. I mean, obviously, we don't know. Let's say he's got a new property coming out that could create the interest in the old property, like this Blade Runner movie. I'm sure there are some people who like the movie and will now go see the original one who didn't see it. So, you've got to look at all the different factors, the content that's coming out, the content that's already out, and what trends that content is showing. And then you would look at the different types of platforms, and this is where maybe you're asking the question and I'm missing it. You're getting creative. Okay, well, what if I were to put it on this new platform? What if I were to adapt it into a new kind of property? And then again, you're looking at the same thing I just talked about, which is what's the market for that estimated to be? And usually there are industry sources that will give you an estimate of the market. What percentage of the market will I be able to get? What kind of growth? Does that make sense?
A 30-second partial answer to that is, when I do it, it depends on what the track record of the person is. One of the things to look at is what's being paid in the marketplace for optioning content. Because so much content doesn't get produced, a lot more of it gets optioned. So a lot of the value of it can be gotten to just by making certain assumptions on how much of it is optionable. Last question in the plaid.
Thank you. So I've encountered a few companies that were going the idea of financing via cryptocurrency, and I was wondering if there's any guidelines about how to figure out what are some scams. What are some good questions to ask?
Here's what you ask. You say to them, what exactly does the person that buys this cryptocurrency token, whatever it is, what do they own? What do they get? And you'll get different answers to that. Sometimes the answer is you have some ownership in the underlying entity, in which case all that you've done is it's stock. At that point, it's stock in a company, and that you're just by a different name. Sometimes the answer is you have the right to buy a T-shirt, DVD, something. You have some right to trade it in for some kind of physical good or even service. That's a whole different. Then it's like an advance payment for something. So you've got to get into what exactly is it for, and then you do the tax and securities analysis. For example, if it's an interest in a company, then that's a securities. You've got to comply with the securities laws. For tax purposes, that's treated as a capital contribution to the entity, right? Versus if the answer is you get a T-shirt or a service or something, then that's advance income to somebody. It's taxable, and it's not a securities. And it's just, so it depends on what the details are of what the person owns, and you have to just get into it. And there's usually what's called a white paper that describes what they own, and you just have to read it carefully and figure it out.
Absolutely, that was really well said. And going back to the last question, of how do you value something that doesn't, hasn't gone to market yet? Many of these ICOs are working off of just a white paper, and there's the whole spectrum of whether it is a security and just a fancy piece of paper for equity ownership, whether in talking about pre-sales, if you have a token can be a ticket that you can then transfer. For us, for Moeda, for instance, we issued these MDA cryptocurrency that then can be used in a Kiva type fashion, where you can then use these tokens to make your own impact investment. So you can invest in these projects and value them and then make a return off of that. So it's almost a new type of commodity that you can use as a tool for an investor in a credit union. So I would really recommend looking in and doing that research and seeing, is this something that could just be done traditionally without blockchain technology, or is there a real intrinsic value to that cryptocurrency?
Ask them if it's a utility token or a securities token. So a utility is you're actually using this, think about it as a ticket in Disneyland or gas in your engine. It's a specific function. It's an item that allows you the utility of doing something else. So if it allows you access to something, or it allows you to participate in some sort of closed system, then it's a utility. Find out what that utility is and decide for yourself, based on your own judgment or judgment of experts, whether you think there's an actual market for that and that's the right team to do it. Look at their advisors, look at their team. Most of these people you'll never heard of. The good ones will have good advisors. If it's a securities token, to that point you are opening yourself up to potential risks. They have to comply. If they're raising money from U.S. sources, it's a very not a complicated process, but they'd have to have either only accredited investors who then disclose. This process called KYC, know your customer. So you want to make sure they're complying with securities law if it is a securities token.
And you want to see what you're giving up. I mean, that's really the bottom line too. What are they getting for it? Are you giving up right to your content? Are you, owning your content? That's the most important thing to me.
And I've gotten the high sign that we're past our time. So first of all, I want to thank all of you for sticking with us for the last hour, and thank the panelists for sharing their intellectual property.